Hey there, and welcome back to Web Development Tutorials. If you have not seen the first two videos, you'll want to watch those first. Check here for a link to basic HTML, and check over here for lesson number 2, which is a link to basic CSS. I'm not going to recover those things, so you'll want to check those out. And if you've already gotten those two and you're kind of on the learning curve, I highly encourage you. Learning web development is a skill you will be very, very glad you learned. It's easy to find work if you're half decent at web development. There's lots of opportunities to work from home, work remote. Currently, right now, I'm in a permanent position and my employer is on the other side of the country. My whole team is on the other side of the country. It's a really great career, in my opinion, to be in. Lots of flexibility, lots of opportunity. It's worth the work. That being said, let's get into building CSS layouts, which is what we're going to do on this one. You know how to do some basic CSS rules, but now we're going to say, let's take this page, this blank page, and really make it feel like an actual real web page. So let's get into it. One thing you'll notice as I'm typing is I'm using a plugin for Sublime Text called Emmet. And what that allows you to do is that allows you to hit tab and auto create some things. So if I do header, it gives me a header tag. If I do UL sub LI times 5, gives me a UL with 5 LIs in it. I can go start tabbing through all the fields. It's really nice. I'll put a little bit of description for it in the description down there on how to do it. But let's get into our layout. A few HTML5 tags I'm going to introduce to you are called header, nav, and footer. I can't remember if I covered div or not, so div is another one. These are all basically non-styling tags by default. They're just container tags. They're called semantic tags, and what they do is they help you kind of give meaning to the content within them just by looking at the code. Clearly, I'm doing a header with a nav. You can put anything you want in here, but when I see nav, it helps the reader understand, or the Google bot understand, when Google's looking at your page to figure out what all the content is, helps you figure out what's inside of it. So as you see, if I just put text, it appears and there's nothing special going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to start building out our page using these semantic tags. I'm going to do an unordered list with 5 LIs in it. And those LIs are all going to have a hyperlinks in them. So this is kind of the way I do it in Emmet. UL with an LI and an A times 5. And there we go. And I'm just going to put pound for the hyperlinks in there, since that kind of tells it to do nothing. I add in some fake links here. Home, blog, about, contact, links. Sure. There we go. And you're like, that does not look like a navigation. It will. We've done it correctly with the tags. We've said UL unordered list with line items. And from there on out, we're going to style them to look the way we want them to. You know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to add an H1, a header. My page. There we go. Website complete. That's going to be our header section. Let's move on. And let's build a 3-column layout. Let's go div class equals row, and let's do 3 div class columns. Div.call times 3. There we go. Emmet is awesome once you get the swing of it. And then footer content. Okay, so this is the markup that we need to make a pretty decent site so far. Let's move over to CSS and show you how this thing starts coming together. Let's start by doing header, and let's give the header a background. For now, we're not going to worry too much about design. Let's just go 000, which is black. You can also go black. And color, white. Save that. There you go. That's starting to come in. Black is just a little too depressing. I'm going to go 999 for a slight grayish color. Let's go body. Let's give body we'll leave body where it is. One thing you'll notice too is by default the body has a slight margin around it. So we're going to go ahead and drop body margin 0. And that'll take care of these two. It won't take care of that one though. Let's go ahead and save, keep moving on. Header H1. This will be our title, and then we can move on to nav. I'm just creating some CSS selectors here for what I'm going to be doing. Nav UL, we'll give that no margin. If you'll notice, by default, the nav UL has margins on it. That took care of a lot. Header H1, let's give you no margin. And let's make sure the header has no margin. Trying to figure out where this extra little bitty margin is coming from. Sometimes there's some defaults on browsers that you're not aware of. Alright, we'll figure that out in a little bit. I'll show you how to inspect that to find out where that padding's coming from. So it clearly isn't that. Alright. So what we'll do now, let's move on to the ULLI. So we're going to make a rule here. You can see I'm further selecting into things by going nav UL. The reason I'm putting nav first is I don't want to style every UL on my page with what I'm putting in here. I just want to style my nav UL right now. Same with here. I don't want to make every LI for the rest of my entire website look like a navigation. So I'm just specifying nav with a UL child with an LI child. So you see it's going nav UL LI, and it's going to style that. What I'm going to do is list style type. By default, it's going to do bulleted, and now I'm going to change that to none. And you'll see now the bullets are gone. There we go. And then I'm also going to change the display to inline block. There's a few display choices by default. You can usually, there's display inline. Oh, there's my problem. Body had a colon in it. And yes, I knew I wasn't crazy. See, margin 0. You can see once I changed it to inline block, they all jumped in line with each other. And the reason I made it inline is also an option, which will give me a similar look. You can see nothing changed. The reason I did inline block is when I did inline block, I can actually assign them fixed widths, and I can do a lot more things with inline block than I can with inline. Let me give them a background color. Let's give these a background of black, a color of white. And you'll notice they're still blue because the hyperlinks, the A tags, default have a color as well. So there you go. That'll take care of those. And I'm also going to add a little bit of margin. Let's try 5 pixels all around. I don't want to do margin. Okay, one thing you'll notice, this is when you do margin, it adds spacing on the outside of your element. As you see here, I have a black background, and margin added spacing here, which is what's giving me this funky look. If I add padding instead of margin, what padding is going to do is, there you go, see now it's going to create padding inside of my element. So what I'm going to do is I like the 5 pixel top and bottom padding, but I want it to have more like 10 pixel on the left and the right. So that looks a little better. I'm actually going to go even more, 15 pixels. Once again, with margin and padding, you can go, it goes top, bottom, left, right. Top right, it goes clockwise. Top, right, bottom, left. And if you just do 2, then it goes top, bottom, left, right. So I'm going 5 pixels, 15 pixels. So that goes top, bottom, 5 pixels, left, right, 15 pixels. If I want it to be more detailed, I could also go 5 pixels, 15 pixels. Same thing. There's that. And then I also do want to drop margins to 0, because notice how there's a little bit of margin in between there. I think there's a little bit of margin there. We'll have to figure out where that margin is coming from. We'll look at that in a little bit. So there's our buttons. You see it's starting to look like a web page. I'm also going to add display inline to my H1 and display inline to my UL. And that should make them, yep, bounce around to the same line, which is very nice. Another thing I'm going to do is start adding some margins to my header now, or padding rather. Let's try the same 5 pixel, 15 pixel padding. It's starting to feel good, although I don't want any padding on the bottom, so I'm actually going to go and extend this rule. So what I just did is 5 pixel, top right, bottom left. There we go. Kind of want these guys to stay on the bottom. It's feeling a little good. Let's maybe see what happens if I do a 15 pixel there. Yeah, feeling decent. Feeling decent. So what's going to happen here is because I made this display inline and this whole UL display inline, by default they're automatically just going to line up with each other. And depending on how the space goes, they're just going to automatically show up where they show up. You'll notice there's a little bit extra padding coming on here. That's because ULs by default have padding as well. Let me drop that. There you go. And now I'm noticing, ooh, okay, I kind of like that default padding there. Maybe what I'm going to do here is give it a little bit of padding on the left. 0, 0. Let's try 15 pixels, 0. Top right, bottom. Whoops, wrong thing. Top right, bottom left. That feels good. So now whatever my title does is going to automatically bump these out further and further along. Let's move on to our 3-column layout. So a little bit of explanation. Since I flew through this, I'm using selectors to obviously clearly grab everything. Header, header 1. I want to kind of keep them grouped so it's easier to figure things out. A decent idea is start with the very top elements of your page, move down the list. You can see I went body, header, what's inside the header. Then I went nav. I didn't do anything specific to the nav, so that could stay there. Then I went what's inside the nav, and then I went what's inside the UL. And so keeping with that, you'll notice we only have a few actual selector rules, CSS rules that we've used. We've used a lot of margin and padding. You're going to use those a ton. You're going to use display a lot. You're going to use background and color. And you know, this list style type, you really only use that one here and there. You see, there's not an infinite amount of CSS rules, or CSS, yeah, rules. Once you get to know them, get to know what they are, you start getting comfortable a lot faster than it feels like at first. So let's move on to our div. And you'll notice we went div class row, and then we went div class column, class column, class column. All right, let's create these things in an actual 3-column layout. Div row. So I went a div with a class of row. If I did this and added that space, then it would look for a div with something class row inside of it. I'll actually just go class row. We'll leave you for now. Class column, and what we're going to do is we're going to give you a float of left. And what that means is everything with the column now floats left. Check it out. So they are all floating left. We have a problem here in that since they're floating left, our footer bumped up. And that's a tricky thing we have to add here. Is we are going to do something sneaky. Is we can do one of two things. We can either make the footer clear both. Clear both means forget about the floats and wrap around. Because lots of times after your things are floating left, let me see if I can show you a little more clearly what's happening here. Let me give it a background of 999 and a padding of, say, 20 pixels. I'll give it a background of 333 so it sticks out. So we've now got these 3 columns. Add a little bit of margin too for effect. Okay, there we go. That looks a little better. 3 columns. Now that they're floating, everything is kind of going to be out of pocket, and they're just going to start lining up on the left, which means that the footer by default is going to bump up lining on the left as well. We don't want that to happen. We want it to do what's called clearing the floats, which means, okay, forget all the floats that are going on, clear it, come back down here. And so that's why I'm adding a clear both. That means it's clearing left and right floats. If you told this to float right, then they'd all start floating based off the right side of the page. So when you tell it clear both, you're telling it clear all the float lefts and the float rights. If you can understand floats, you've basically understood 80% of CSS layouts. Maybe not 80%, maybe halfway through. Floats are a little bit interesting to wrap your head around at first, but as you can see, it's not that complicated. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to actually go a percentage size. Let's see, we have 3, so that would be 33% for the entire thing. So if each gets 33%, we've basically filled out our whole guy. And you see there, no matter what my size of my window is, they're always going to adjust. What I'm actually going to do now is add a margin, say 1%. So that will now cause them to bump around. Okay, so what happened here? We have 1% margin plus 33%. If you add these 3 together, 33%, you're getting 99%. And now we added a margin of 1, 1, 1, 1. We basically added 6% to margins. So now we're ending up at 105%. That doesn't work. So when you float stuff, they're just going to keep wrapping around. It's really nice. Let's say we added 5 more divs. You'll notice they just keep wrapping around. Kind of like what Pinterest does. The things just keep wrapping and coming down and wrapping and coming down. We're interested in an even 3-column layout. So I'm trying to think of what the math would be here. I basically need to drop 5% off. Let's go 31. There you go. So now we've got our 3-column layout. And you notice that no matter how my browser window changes, it stays nice and nifty. That's really great. So that's kind of a lot of, when you can, use a percentage layout, because what that's going to give you is the ability for your page to look really nice on all devices. You can go width and keep it fixed. I went 200 pixels there. But you notice that depending on what kind of screen size you get, it's not always going to look the same. I'm going to leave this here because in future lessons we're going to cover Twitter Bootstrap, which does a lot of these smarts for you and does a lot of cool things for making it look great on every device. I just kind of want you to get the basics of how we do everything here. One thing I'm going to add before calling this layout done, let's add border radius, 10 pixels. And that's going to add rounded corners. It doesn't look too nice right now. Let me make it 5. And let me add that padding back in. So there you go. Now we're calling, whoops, we got a padding of 10 pixels. So now what you noticed here is that bumped our margin off again. So maybe I'm going to go padding. There we go. So what I did is I changed our margin to 0.5% and our padding's got 0.5% on the left and right. So maybe I'll go 10 pixels top bottom, 0.5% left right. And we definitely need a color. There we go, we're getting a layout. I don't like that the footer's clearing both by default. I want it to be a little more generic than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a row after. And this is kind of what's called a pseudo element. You see that now I get the exact same effect. Row after creates a fake element after the row that's invisible, and you get to style it however you want. So all that element does right now is clear both. So anytime I add a row tag, it's going to clear both after it, meaning that any floats, they're all going to be checked out, and the next guy is going to appear exactly as you wish it to. So if I copy and paste this row, and I just have one column, and did not do what I wanted it to do. Oh, why is it doing that? Okay. There we go. Make the row clear both. And I'm not sure why the afters were doing what it's doing, so I'll look into that and put it in the comments below so I don't look like a fool here on public YouTube. So that's pretty much where you're going to go. Not bad. Add my footer to clear both again. One thing you'll learn about web development is you never learn it all. Even if you knew it 6 months ago, you might not have used that certain thing for 6 months. And once we get into Bootstrap in the next video, you're going to see why I might not have remembered what that was, because I don't need to type it anymore. There's a library that types it all for me. So that's the basics of creating an HTML layout. You already know how to link these pages. And there you have it. We'll catch you around.